The destruction of one of the greatest civilizations in world history was so complete that within a couple of generations, no one even remembered where its capital city had been. One of the greatest libraries the world had ever known was buried beneath a desert, forgotten for 2,000 years. The empire's last great ruler had proclaimed himself the king of the world, but it seems as though the world forgot about him soon after his death. It wasn't until the 19th century that the library he'd built would be unearthed, revealing thousands of clay tablets inscribed in cuneiform text. A trove of literature and history that open up a whole new chapter in the story of civilization. This is the story of the Assyrians and their last great king. King of the world. During Ashurbanipal's reign, the Assyrian Empire reached its zenith of power and territorial expansion. Ash and the Assyrians controlled huge swaths of land that stretched from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf and from Egypt to the borders of Iran. It was a sprawling empire with tons of cultural and regional diversity. Almost immediately after he became king, Ashurbanipal went into Egypt and conquered the Kushite pharaohs who'd been ruling the Nile for the last century. His father had started the job with a series of invasions between 671 and 669 BC, but he kicked the bucket before he could put a bow on the conquest. With Egypt significantly weakened, Ash came in and swept up. Ashurbanipal's father had basically kicked Pharaoh Tantamani out of the capital city, Memphis, and appointed a guy named Nisho I as pharaoh. But when Esarhaddon withdrew and died, Tantamani came back and retook the city. Ashurbanipal and his army headed back to Egypt in 663, and with the help of an Egyptian prince named Psamtik, their coalition would boot Tantamani out for good. Ash then made Psamtik the pharaoh in return for his help, and Egypt was basically an Assyrian vassal state for a while. Another feather in the cap for Ash during his reign was the conquest of Elam, a kingdom located in present-day southwestern Iran. The Elamites had long been a thorn in the side of Assyria, periodically challenging their dominance in the region. Ashurbanipal wanted them gone. The campaign against Elam was a dazzling display of Assyrian military might. Ashurbanipal mobilized his forces, including highly skilled soldiers on chariots and heavily armored infantry, to march on Elam's cities and fortresses. The Assyrians also used their patented siege techniques, battering arms, and other sophisticated tech of the time. The Assyrian forces eventually captured the capital city of Susa and then razed it to the ground. No, not razed. No more Susa, no more Empire of Elam. Ashurbanipal's victory was commemorated with grandiose inscriptions and reliefs celebrating the triumph over his long-standing rival. Ash definitely reveled in the victory. Some of his braggadocious writing documents the conquest. For a distance of a month and 25 days' journey, I devastated the provinces of Elam, Salt, and Silu. I scattered over them the dust of Susa, Madaktu, Haltamash, and the rest of the cities I gathered together and took to Assyria. The noise of the people, the tread of cattle and sheep, the glad shouts of rejoicing, I banished from its fields. Wild gazelles and all kinds of beasts of the plain I caused to lie down among them, as if at home. The conquest of Elam solidified Ashurbanipal's reputation as a conqueror, a king of unparalleled power and dominance. It also played a significant role in his self-perception as the king of the world. Ashurbanipal fancied himself as the supreme ruler, not only of Assyria, but also of the known civilized world. It was a pretty arrogant title, but by this point, the Assyrian Empire was the largest and most powerful in the world, basically the pinnacle of civilization at the time, so Ash did have some bragging rights. Under Ashurbanipal's rule, the empire thrived basically in every way. The conquered territories brought a ton of wealth and resources to Assyria, fueling its economy and allowing for massive architectural projects and a flourishing art scene. The city of Nineveh, the Assyrian capital, became a bustling center of trade, learning, and innovation. Not so brotherly love. The rivalry between Ashurbanipal and his brother, Shamash-shum-ukin, adds a pretty fascinating layer of drama to the story of the Assyrian Empire. It's like a gripping tale of good old-fashioned family drama / sibling rivalry, sprinkled with political intrigue, and the whole thing ended in one of the most brutal sieges in history. Let's rewind to the beginnings of what went down first. Ashurbanipal was the youngest of 3 brothers, so he really had no business becoming king. So when Ashurbanipal's oldest brother died, the second oldest, the incredibly named Shamash-shum-ukin, figured he'd be next in line to take the reins of the empire. But he wasn't. Despite being the younger of the two, Ashurbanipal was appointed crown prince by their father. The decision must have sent shockwaves through the traditional power structures, leaving Shamash-shum-ukin feeling like he had been robbed of his birthright. A lot of Assyrians were probably also scratching their heads saying, "This again?" It was like Ur-Sarhadon was provoking some kind of civil war, which is exactly what would end up happening. The stage was set for a showdown between brothers, with the crown of the mighty Assyrian Empire at stake. As Ashurbanipal descended to the throne, tensions began to simmer beneath the surface. Shamash-shum-ukin, probably nursing a bruised ego and fueled by a desire to prove himself, began to plot his own path to power. He really wanted to Shamash him up and be the king. You see what I did there? Their father did throw Shamash a bone and made him king of Babylon, and for a while it seemed like a fragile peace had been established between the brothers. But beneath the surface, resentment definitely still simmered, fueling Shamash-shum-ukin's ambition to seize control of the entire empire from the hands of his younger brother. Babylon was a great city, but it was still a vassal state to Nineveh, the magnificent capital of the Assyrian Empire, and thus Shamash still had to answer to Ash. In an audacious move, Shamash declared a rebellion against Ash, rallying the people of Babylon to his cause. The stage was set for a brutal conflict that would decide the fate of the empire. Ash and his army made their way over to Babylon to meet the scorned older brother. The siege of Babylon lasted for 2 long years and painted a grim picture of the horrors of war. The city, once a thriving cultural and economic center, was reduced to a battleground, its inhabitants caught in the crossfire of sibling rivalry. As the siege wore on, conditions deteriorated to unimaginable depth. Ultimately, the siege ended in a bloodbath. Ashurbanipal's forces breached the walls of Babylon and the city was plunged into chaos. The victorious army unleashed its wrath upon the rebellious citizens, exacting brutal revenge for the years of resistance and suffering endured during the siege. As for Shamash, he found himself trapped in his burning palace, up in flames just like his ambitions for becoming king of the empire. The tragic fate of the once king of Babylon served as a grim reminder of the consequences of rebellion and the price paid for challenging the established order. It also served as a grim reminder not to mess with Ashurbanipal, the spy master prince. But let's rewind again to Ash's time as crown prince. Before he became king of the world, Ashurbanipal was something of a spy master. As the crown prince of Assyria, his father gave him the responsibility of gathering information from agents across the empire and compiling intelligence reports that would give important insights into what was going on in and around the realm. Imagine the young prince, surrounded by a network of spies, informants, and undercover agents, each working diligently to uncover secrets, monitor rival factions, and gather intelligence from every corner of the empire. They were the eyes and ears of Ashurbanipal, reporting back to him with crucial information that would shape the decisions of the Assyrian court. Through his Charlotte's web of espionage, Ash pieced together a pretty comprehensive understanding of the political landscape, both within the empire and without. His agents operated in the shadows, discreetly gathering little tidbits of information, piecing together the puzzles of rivalries and potential threats that surrounded the empire. The intelligence reports compiled by Ashurbanipal's network were pretty valuable. They gave him the knowledge he needed to navigate the complex web of political intrigue that was the Assyrian Empire. They clued him into what was going on with the rival kings, what alliances were being forged and where, and any potential weaknesses that could be exploited to Assyria's advantage. Game of Thrones type stuff. I'm just picturing Ashurbanipal as Varys, but with more hair on top and a big old beard. Ashurbanipal's intelligence network also extended beyond politics. We'll get into more detail about this later, but Ash was also super interested in the arts and sciences. The soon-to-be king had a deep appreciation for brain power and was really into preserving ancient texts. He employed scholars and scribes who meticulously transcribed and preserved tons of literary and scientific works from all over the region, building up what would become one of the most renowned libraries of the ancient world. Nerd, am I right? Just kidding. Through his network of spies and agents, Ash was able to maintain a firm grip on the pulse of the empire, basically becoming a master of politics and culture before he ever became king. His reign would for sure be marked by military triumphs, including the destruction of his own brother and several rival kingdoms. But it would also be full of administrative reforms and the promotion of a flourishing art scene, achievements made possible in part by the insights he picked up during his spy master days. The Ruthless King. But the grandeur of Ashurbanipal's empire and his self-proclaimed title as the King of the World shouldn't overshadow some of the harsher realities of Assyrian rule. The empire relied on a system of tribute and demanded loyalty and money from the conquered lands on stricter terms than a child demanding more candy from a tired mother. The Assyrians were pretty brutal overlords in a lot of ways, and Ashurbanipal was no different. Let's focus on the Assyrian military in general first. The Assyrians weren't to be messed with. They had an efficient war machine built on a combination of really good tactics, organization, and some of the most advanced technology of the age. They also had a professional standing army, which was rarer than clean drinking water in the ancient world. This allowed them to maintain a well-disciplined and trained force that was ready to lop off heads at any moment. They also pioneered the use of iron weapons and armor, which gave them a distinct advantage over their unfortunate adversaries, who were still mostly using bronze. There was also their sophisticated siege tech and techniques. The Assyrians had advanced battering rams, siege towers, and siege engines to blast through fortified cities. We already saw what happened to Babylon and Susa. On top of that, they had efficient logistics and supply systems that made sure their armies could sustain long campaigns deep into enemy territory. But the Assyrians were also infamous for their violence. A guy that murdered his own brother. That's a pretty brutal move. They had a scorched earth policy, and often just completely devastated the lands they captured to make sure none of their new subjects ever thought about rising up against them. The Assyrians were also known to carry out mass deportations, forcefully relocating conquered populations to different regions of the empire. These deportations aimed to break up resistance and dilute local identities, which helped them keep a stranglehold on what was a constantly expanding empire. The Assyrians also had some pretty terrifying psychological warfare tactics. They were known to publicly puncture or flay their captured enemies, as their friends, family, or fellow soldiers looked on in horror. There are a whole lot of inscriptions and reliefs glorifying these acts that were meant to showcase the power and might of the Assyrian Empire and serve as a warning to any potential challengers. Ashurbanipal was raised in this culture, and there are some particularly gruesome tales documenting some of the twisted stuff he did. One of them involves how he allegedly stuck a dog chain through the jaw of a defeated king and made him cower at his feet to humiliate him. We don't know who exactly this king was or what exactly he did to deserve such a gruesome punishment, but it was recorded in the clay tablets of Assyrian history. Then there's also the sculpture Ashurbanipal had commissioned to celebrate his victory over the Elamites. At first glance, it would seem like a fine piece of art. He and his wife dining in a beautiful garden filled with lush trees and flowers, until you notice the severed head of the king of Elam hanging from the branch of a tree. Ooh. Ashurbanipal the Luxurious. Let's talk about Nineveh for a second, and the extravagant lifestyle the king of the world enjoyed from within its walls. Nineveh was a city that poured splendor from every corner. It had magnificent palaces covered in intricate carvings and precious materials. Just picturing it now. Man, I bet that was beautiful. It was probably really, really nice to be around. It was probably like... Within the palace walls, Ashurbanipal had chambers filled with loot. Gold, silver, jewels, and all kinds of luxurious goods were stocked inside. A dazzling display of wealth that probably made the king of Elam's place look like a dump. Ash spared no expense when it came to decking out his royal abode. And it wasn't just the palaces that were swanky. Ashurbanipal had a flair for creating extravagant gardens that any horticulturist today would give a big green thumbs up to. The Hanging Gardens of Nineveh, as they were called, was a masterpiece of engineering and horticulture and a testament to Ashurbanipal's love for nature and his desire to create some kind of earthly paradise. A lot of press usually goes to the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, but many historians say that's a misnomer, and Nineveh was the real go-to city for everything green. Nineveh's lush gardens were built on terraces with an intricate canal system complete with cascading waterfalls and all kinds of plants. Orchids, pear, fig, pomegranate, and olive trees, more flowers, more fruits and vegetables. There were exotic animals in there too, and even a reserve filled with lions that Ashurbanipal could hunt at his leisure. It was a sanctuary of serenity and lion carcasses amidst the bustling city, a place where Ashurbanipal could escape the pressures of ruling, commune with the beauty of nature, and maybe suspend some enemy noggins on the beautiful trees. Ashurbanipal the Bookworm. Throughout history, few rulers can claim to have had a love affair with literature quite like Ashurbanipal. The king of the world, the ruthless guy who pierced rivals' kings with dog chains and suspended their heads from trees as decorations for his garden parties, was also the king of books. He was a sucker for good prose. Ashurbanipal was the kind of guy who didn't just settle for a modest little bookshelf in his palace. He built himself one of the most massive libraries the world has ever seen, the envy of scholars everywhere. Located in the capital of Nineveh, Ash's library contained a staggering number of cuneiform tablets, tens of thousands of them. For all the literary treasures discovered in the library, one gem definitely stands out: the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest surviving written story. The epic poem, dating back to even more ancient times when people rode around in chariots and fought mythical beasts, tells the story of a legendary king's conquest for immortality. Classic stuff. Ashurbanipal probably read it every night before he went to bed, whispering to himself, "I will be immortal. I will be immortal." He didn't do too bad of a job. I mean, think about it. We're talking about him right now. The library also held a story called the unrivalled, a tale of creation that make even the most die-hard of cosmetologists raise an eyebrow. Picture gods battling it out for supremacy, with planets and stars forming in the aftermath, kind of like an ancient Mesopotamian war of the universe. Then there's the Atrahasis, an Akkadian epic that features a massive flood and a hero trying to navigate the chaos. Sound familiar? You know what? It should. The Atrahasis is basically the original Noah's Ark story. But beyond the epics and myths, Ashurbanipal's library held a whole litany of other knowledge. It housed texts on medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and botany. The Assyrians weren't just busy conquering, they also enjoyed a good nerd out. A mysterious end. The last of the great Assyrian kings was Ashurbanipal. His reign lasted nearly 40 years, from 669 BC to 631. He did a lot of things. He finished the job his father, Esarhaddon, started and conquered Egypt. He conquered the great empire of Elam. He amassed a vast library. He was a trained spy and a prolific lion hunter. He murdered his own brother, something that apparently was pretty common for Assyrian rulers at the time. We'll get into all of that soon. But we know very little about the end of his reign. It's like there's a chapter missing at the end, so let's move that part up to the front. What we do know is that a growing disconnect emerged between Ashurbanipal and the traditional elite of the empire. The king, with all his conquests and grand ambitions, may have inadvertently overshadowed the established power structures. He started doing things that the elites didn't like. He appointed eunuchs and entertainers to prominent positions in his court, which drew the ire of a lot of the nobles who got passed over for different jobs. Imagine the nobles, dressed in all their finest clothes, trying to catch the king's eye, but then scowling when he gives an important position to some lowly singer. So many cuneiform tablets documented the life and reign of the last great Assyrian king. But so few tell us how he went out. Did he end up sulking in his library for the remainder of his days? Did the ticked-off elites rise up and overthrow him? Did he go riding off into a desert sunset, never to return? We don't know. The little we do know comes from a tablet where an apparently weary Ashurbanipal bemoans his situation. "I cannot do away with the strife in my country and the dissensions in my family. Disturbing scandals oppress me always. Illness of mind and flesh bow me down. With cries of woe I bring my days to an end. On the day of the city god, the day of the festival, I am wretched. Death is seizing hold upon me and bears me down." A tradition of world leaders. Finally, let's talk about the term King of the World. Ashurbanipal loved the title. It's obvious from his inscriptions, but he was by no means the first one to use it. There was a tradition of leaders calling themselves versions of it before Ash, and there continue to be leaders who call themselves versions of it after. The first guy to use it, as far as we know, was Sargon of Akkad, who lived in the 24th century BCE. Sargon was the founder of the Akkadian Empire and is often described as the first recorded emperor in history. In his inscriptions, he proudly proclaimed himself as the king of Kish, the king of Sumer and Akkad, the king of the four corners of the world. Sargon was an ambitious guy and didn't settle for just being a regional ruler. He wanted the whole pie. Sargon's audacious claim to be the king of the four corners of the world set a precedent for future rulers. It established a tradition where monarchs sought to assert their dominance and authority by adopting grandiose titles of vast territories. It was a way to legitimize their rule and project an image of supreme power. Over this time, this tradition trickled down through history. A lot of subsequent rulers inspired by Sargon's bold proclamation took on similar titles. The concept of being the king of the world or the king of the universe became a symbol of supreme authority, representing their dominion over as much land and as many people as possible. The title of the king of the world or its equivalents wasn't limited to a specific region or time period either. There are examples of rulers from different ancient civilizations who fashioned themselves godly saviors who control the world and the universe. From the pharaohs of ancient Egypt to the emperors of China to the monarchs of Persia and, of course, Ashurbanipal and the Assyrians, the tradition was all over the place. And yeah, the God thing. The idea of being the ultimate ruler, the king of all, also resonated with the political and religious ideologies of ancient societies. It tied into the concept of divine kingship, where rulers claimed to have a special connection to the gods and derive their authority from a higher power. By yelling at the top of their lungs that they were kings of the world, they were really trying to establish a divine mandate to rule. Or were they trying to compensate for something? Our story ends where it began. Despite all his fancy gardens, books, and military tech, Ashurbanipal seemed to kind of just disappear, and so did his empire. Historians say it probably just grew too big and unwieldy. There were a couple of kings after Ash, but none would ever be as powerful, and Nineveh would soon get wiped out in much the same way that Ashurbanipal and the Assyrians wiped out a lot of rival cities during their run as the world's #1 empire. But at least they recorded everything on nice, durable clay tablets that were preserved perfectly in the sand for people to dig up 2,000 years later. Thanks for the library, Ash, and thank you for watching. What else do you want to know about the Assyrian Empire? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more nutty history.